The hangers clicked together, a sharp, metallic sound that echoed in the cavernous silence of Damien's apartment. Each suit was a monument to his success, a black, navy, or charcoal testament to a world I hovered on the edge of, never quite belonging. My fingers, tracing the fine wool of a jacket that cost more than my monthly rent, felt clumsy, out of place. The scent of dry-cleaning chemicals and his expensive cologne clung to the air, a perfume of a life that wasn't mine. I was 25, and my most significant achievement of the day was successfully organizing Damien Croft's wardrobe. The thought was a bitter pill I'd learned to swallow without water. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, San Francisco glittered, a carpet of diamonds laid out for him, while I stood in the shadows, arranging the props of his greatness. "Elara, you still alive in there?" His voice cut through the quiet, laced with a familiar, teasing condescension. It was the tone he used when he'd finished conquering his world for the day and had a moment to glance down at mine. "Just finishing up," I called back, my own voice sounding small. He appeared in the doorway of the walk-in closet, leaning against the frame, phone in one hand, a glass of something amber in the other. At 27, Damien carried himself with the unshakable confidence of a man who'd never been told no. His success in the tech world, rapid and dazzling, had only cemented what he'd always believed about himself, that he was simply better. "Good, the tailor needs the Navy Tom Ford for tomorrow morning, 9 sharp, meeting with the VCs from Singapore." He didn't look at me as he spoke, his eyes scanning his phone screen. "You remembered to tell them about the slight pull on the left sleeve." I'd noticed it myself last week, a tiny imperfection invisible to anyone who wasn't paid to look for such things. "I did. They said it'll be seamless." "It had better be." He finally glanced up, a slow, appraising look that started at my sensible shoes and ended at my face. "You look tired." It wasn't concern. It was a critique, a notation of a flaw in his otherwise polished environment. I felt a familiar heat rise in my cheeks, a mixture of shame and resentment. "Long day at the office," I muttered, turning back to the rack of shirts. "That place," he sighed, taking a sip of his drink. "I still don't understand why you bother. It's a dead end, Elara. You're smarter than answering phones and filing paperwork for a failing import-export firm." This was our dance. He would point out the inadequacies of my life, framing it as caring advice, and I would try to defend an existence I knew was shrinking by the day. The problem was, he wasn't wrong about the job. It was soul-crushing. But hearing it from him, delivered with that casual superiority, made me want to defend it fiercely. "It's a job, Damien. It pays the bills." "Barely." He pushed off the doorframe and walked closer. He smelled of clean, expensive things, bergamot and sandalwood. "You have so much more potential. You just lack direction. You need a catalyst, something to light a fire under you." The irony was a physical ache. The only thing his words lit was a slow-burning fuse of doubt. He was the catalyst, all right, systematically dismantling any lingering belief I had in myself. I'd met him 2 years ago, bright-eyed and hopeful, thinking his ambition was magnetic. I hadn't realized it would demand the sacrifice of my own. "I've been thinking about direction, actually," I said, the words feeling dangerous as they left my mouth. I kept my back to him, focusing on aligning the perfectly spaced hangers. I was looking into programs at State, maybe go back for a degree, political science, or, I don't know, something with more teeth. The silence behind me was heavy. I could feel him still. When he spoke again, his voice was closer, softer, which was always more dangerous than his loudest pronouncements. "Back to school? Elara, be realistic. You'd be, 30 by the time you finished? Buried in debt? For what? An entry-level position somewhere else." I turned to face him then. The city lights haloed his head, making him look like a dark angel. "It wouldn't be for nothing. It would be for me." He gave a short, dismissive laugh. It wasn't cruel, not exactly. It was worse. It was the sound of genuine, unshakable certainty. "This is your problem. You get these little ideas, these whims, and you think they're grand plans. You live in a fantasy world." He reached out and tucked a strand of my hair behind my ear, a gesture that should have been tender but felt like a branding. "Your strength is in your support role. You're organized. You're diligent. Not everyone is built to lead. There's no shame in knowing your place." My place. The words echoed in the sterile, beautiful apartment. My place was here, organizing his life, quieting my own ambitions so they wouldn't disturb the narrative of his rise. The fuse in my chest burned shorter. "I need to go," I said, my voice tight. "I'm meeting Chloe." His expression shifted to mild annoyance. "Chloe, of course. Will she be feeding you more platitudes about finding yourself?" "She's my friend." "She's an enabler. She coddles you." He shook his head, already moving on, the conversation about my future dismissed as trivial. "Don't be late tomorrow. The car is picking us up at 8 for the airport." He didn't ask if I wanted to go on his business trip to LA. He told me. I was part of the itinerary, another item to be managed. The coffee shop was a sanctuary. It smelled of ground beans and burnt sugar, a stark contrast to the scentless perfection of Damien's world. Chloe was already there, tucked into a corner booth, her laptop open and a mess of colorful sticky notes surrounding her. Chloe Williams, a graphic designer, lived in a universe of vibrant chaos, and seeing her felt like taking a full breath after being underwater. "You have that look," she said without preamble, closing her laptop as I slid into the seat opposite her. "I've been mentally filing Damien's ego all afternoon look." A weak smile touched my lips. "Is it that obvious?" "To me, always. To him, he's too busy admiring his reflection in his phone screen to notice." She pushed a massive mug of tea toward me. "I got you the chamomile. You look like you need sedating, not caffeinating." I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic, letting the heat seep into my cold fingers. "He thinks I'm having whims again." "Oh, God forbid." Chloe rolled her eyes, a gesture she perfected over a decade of friendship. "What was the whim du jour?" I took a deep breath. I mentioned maybe going back to school. Chloe's face lit up. "Elara, that's brilliant. What did you have in mind? You were always a policy wonk. Remember that time in high school you wrote a 20-page paper on geopolitical strategy for extra credit?" He said I'd be 30 by the time I finished, buried in debt, that I'm not built to lead. The words tumbled out, flat and heavy. He said there's no shame in knowing my place. Chloe's expression hardened. "That arrogant, condescending son of a bitch." Her voice was low and fierce. "His place is on a throne of his own making, and he thinks your place is shining his shoes. Tell me you're not listening to him." "It's hard not to, Chloe. He's not entirely wrong. The job is a dead end. I am lost. I don't know how to start over. I feel like I'm stuck in concrete." "Then you break the concrete," she said, leaning forward, her eyes intense. "You don't need a degree from state to do that. You need a change, a big one, something that gets you the hell away from him and that miserable job and this whole life." She gestured around us, but I knew she meant the life I'd built around Damien. "And do what? Join the circus?" "Something like that." A slow, determined smile spread across her face. "My cousin Jason, the one in the army, he's home on leave. I was talking to him last week. He was telling me about the training, the opportunities. They have jobs for smart people, Elara, intelligence, analysis. It's not all running through mud with a rifle." I stared at her. "The military, Chloe, be serious." "I am being serious. Think about it. It's structure. It's purpose. It's a way out. They pay for your education after. It's a clean break. A total reset." Her words painted a picture that was both terrifying and tantalizing. A world away from dry cleaning and condescending remarks. A world where I could be measured by my own merit, not by my usefulness to Damien Croft. "I can't just join the army," I whispered, but the idea once spoken took root. It was audacious. It was the opposite of a whim. "Why not? You're smart, you're tough, you're stuck. What do you have to lose?" She reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "You are not the person he says you are. You are so much more. You just need to go somewhere you're forced to see it." I looked down at our joined hands. Mine felt small and cold in hers. For the first time that day, a flicker of something other than defeat stirred in my chest. It was small, a tiny, guttering flame, but it was there. The flicker died an hour later, smothered by the oppressive atmosphere of Damien's high-rise condo. He'd been on a call when I got back, his voice a confident drone from the study. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, the conversation with Chloe feeling like a dream from another lifetime. This was reality. The polished floors, the minimalist art, the crushing weight of his expectations. He found me in the living room, staring out at the twinkling lights of the Bay Bridge. "You're quiet," he observed, pouring himself another drink. Chloe, fill your head with more nonsense. I turned to face him. The resolve I'd felt in the coffee shop had curdled into a desperate need for validation. I needed him to see me, just once. We were talking about my future, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. He chuckled. Let me guess. She thinks you should become a yoga instructor or open a Etsy store selling, what? Knitted cozies for activist causes. No, I took a step toward him. She thinks I should consider the military. The chuckle died in his throat. He stared at me, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning amusement. The military? You're joking. I'm not. They have roles for intelligence work. Analysis, it's a path, a real one. He set his glass down on the granite countertop with a sharp click. Elora, that is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. You, in the military, you can't even parallel park without having a panic attack. The discipline alone would break you in a week. He walked toward me, shaking his head. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You hear one idea and you latch onto it without any thought for reality. It's a fantasy. The words hit their mark, each one a precise strike against my crumbling defenses. It's not a fantasy. It's a possibility. It's a chance to be something more than this. I gestured weakly at the space between us, at the life of quiet servitude. More than what? He asked, his voice dropping, turning cold. More than being with me? Is that what this is about? You think joining the army will make you my equal? The naked contempt in his voice was like a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. That's not what I said. You didn't have to. I see the resentment in your eyes. You think I don't see you looking at my life, my success, and feeling small? So you concoct this pathetic, juvenile plan to play soldier. He was in front of me now, his eyes boring into mine. Let me save you the trouble, Elara. Let me give you a dose of reality. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Don't. You, he said, each word deliberate and sharp as a scalpel, will never amount to anything. The world stopped. The city lights outside seemed to freeze. The words didn't just hurt, they felt final. Like a verdict. They tapped directly into the deep well of self-doubt I'd carried since childhood, the one I'd tried to fill with his approval, and he had just confirmed its bottomless depth. All the fight left me. The flicker of hope Chloe had ignited was extinguished. I felt hollowed out, empty. I just stared at him, at the absolute certainty etched on his handsome face. He mistook my silence for acceptance. He nodded, a satisfied look softening his features. It's for the best you hear it now. Save yourself the embarrassment. He picked up his glass again, the moment of confrontation already over for him. Now, about the itinerary for LA, I need you to. I didn't hear the rest. A strange calm settled over me. The pain was still there, a sharp, shattered thing in my chest, but it was being encased in ice. I turned and walked out of the living room, away from him, toward the guest room where I kept my things. My movements were automatic. I heard him call my name, a note of irritation in his voice, but it sounded distant, like a voice from the end of a long tunnel. In the room, I closed the door. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't cry. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the dark room. The silence was absolute. My fingers moved across the keyboard, clumsy at first, then with a gathering certainty. I opened a search engine. The words felt alien, impossible, as I typed them. United States Marine Corps officer selection. The screen filled with images. Men and women in sharp uniforms, standing with a posture I couldn't imagine possessing. It looked like another planet. A planet where discipline wasn't a punishment, but a tool. Where structure wasn't a cage, but a foundation. Damien's words echoed in my mind. You will never amount to anything. I stared at the screen, at the eagle, globe, and anchor emblem. The hollow feeling inside me began to change. The ice around my heart cracked, not with warmth, but with a new, steely resolve. The pain was still there, but it was no longer a wound. It was a fuel. He was wrong. He had to be wrong. I would make him wrong. I clicked on the link for the information request form. The fields blinked back at me, empty and waiting. Name, address, age, education. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the first full breath I'd taken all night. My hand, which had felt so clumsy arranging his suits, was steady as I began to type. I filled the fields with the facts of my small, inadequate life. But as I typed, I wasn't seeing the person I was. I was seeing the ghost of the person I would have to become. I finished and hovered the cursor over the submit button. Outside, the city lights still twinkled, mocking, but they didn't seem to mock me anymore. They seemed to wait. I clicked the button. There was no fanfare, no dramatic chord, just a quiet whirring from the laptop and a new screen that said, "Thank you for your interest." I closed the laptop. The room was dark again, but something had changed. The trajectory of my life, which had been arcing slowly downward for years, had just been violently, irrevocably bent. I wasn't happy. I wasn't hopeful. I was determined. It was a colder, harder thing than hope. It was a promise I made to myself in the silent, dark room, a promise sealed with the echo of his cruel, final words. I would amount to something, and the first step was to walk out of his apartment and never, ever look back. The mud was a living thing, cold and greedy, sucking at my boots with every step. Rain, the kind that feels like needles against exposed skin, had been falling for hours, turning the Quantico obstacle course into a special kind of hell. My muscles screamed, a raw, burning protest that started in my thighs and radiated out to the very tips of my fingers, which were numb and clumsy around the slick stock of my M16. The pack on my back felt like it was filled with lead, not gear, and the weight of it threatened to drive me face first into the mire with every lurching forward motion. 48 hours. That's how long we'd been at this, a relentless cycle of physical torment and sleep-deprived decision-making. This was the crucible, the final gut check of officer candidate school, and it was designed to find the breaking point you never knew you had. I was pretty sure I'd found mine about 3 miles back. "Move it, Candidate Vance. You think the enemy's going to wait for you to have a nap?" The voice of the instructor, a granite-faced gunnery sergeant, was a whip crack in the damp air, devoid of any sympathy. It was just another sound competing with the drumming rain, the squelch of mud, and the ragged gasps of the other candidates around me. My mind, a traitor in these moments, drifted from the immediate agony. It slipped back 4 years to a different kind of weight. The weight of Damien's gaze, dismissive and cool, as I stood in his impossibly clean apartment, holding a suit he deemed insufficiently pressed. "It's a simple job, Alara. I need someone who can handle details without being told twice." The memory was as sharp and clear as the present was blurred by exhaustion. That feeling of being small, of being an accessory to someone else's important life, had been a constant, low-grade poison. Here in the mud, the poison had transformed. It wasn't a source of shame anymore, it was fuel. A bitter, angry fuel that kept my legs moving when every sane instinct told me to just lie down. "You're not built for pressure," his voice echoed, not as a wound, but as a challenge. I focused on the memory of his condescending smile, the way he'd looked at my sensible, off-the-rack office wear. I let the anger heat my cold-blooded veins. "Watch me." A candidate to my right stumbled and went down hard, a low moan escaping his lips. An instructor was on him instantly, yelling, pushing, demanding he get up. For a terrifying second, I felt the pull of solidarity, the urge to stop and help him to his feet. But that wasn't the test. The test was to endure your own hell and keep moving, to lead yourself before you could ever hope to lead others. I forced my eyes forward, locking onto the back of the candidate in front of me, using him as a guidepost through the murk. I left the fallen candidate behind, the sound of the instructors haranguing fading into the rain. The guilt was a fresh weight, but I carried it. I was learning to carry everything. Somehow my feet kept moving. The sun began to bleed through the gray clouds, casting long, weak shadows. We reached the final hill, a soul-crushing incline that seemed to defy the laws of physics. It was here that I saw Master Sergeant Ben Stone for the first time. He wasn't one of our screaming instructors. He stood off to the side, a mountain of a man in a utility uniform, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable beneath a campaign cover. He didn't say a word, but his eyes tracked us, calm and assessing. He looked bored, as if watching a bunch of half-drowned rats claw their way up a mudslide was a perfectly ordinary way to spend a Tuesday. There was a stillness to him that was more intimidating than all the yelling. He represented a standard, a level of toughness I couldn't yet comprehend. I dug deep, deeper than I thought possible, and found one last reservoir of will. I focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on the simple, brutal arithmetic of survival. I didn't look at the top of the hill, I looked at the next 6 inches of ground. And then the next. And then, impossibly, I was at the summit. I didn't feel triumph. I felt hollowed out, a shell held upright only by the rigid structure of my uniform and the last vestiges of stubborn pride. Later, after the simulated missions were over, after we'd been granted the surreal gift of a hot meal and a few hours of blessed, dreamless sleep, I found myself in the base library. It was a silent, cavernous space that smelled of old paper and floor wax. I was supposed to be studying land navigation, but my brain was still too scrambled for contour lines. I was staring blankly at a map of a fictional mountain range when a shadow fell over my table. I looked up. It was the silent observer from the hill, Master Sergeant Stone. Up close, he was even more imposing. His face was a roadmap of lines carved by sun and experience, and his eyes, a steady, calm brown, missed nothing. "Candidate Vance," he said, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. It wasn't a question. "Yes, Master Sergeant." He pulled out the chair opposite me and sat down with a quiet sigh, the furniture groaning in protest. He didn't speak for a long moment, just looked at me with that unnerving, perceptive gaze. "Saw you on the course today, on the last hill." My heart sank. I'd been caught. He'd seen me hesitate when the other candidate fell. He was going to cite me for lack of teamwork, for poor leadership. "Yes, Master Sergeant." "You were about to fold," he stated matter-of-factly. "About 3/4 of the way up, your body was done, but you didn't." I stayed silent, unsure where this was going. "What were you thinking about," he asked, "when you decided not to quit?" The question was so direct, so personal it threw me. The instructors dealt in collective reprimands and loud, general motivation. They didn't ask about your private thoughts. The truth, about Damien and the shame and the anger, felt too raw, too pathetic to voice. I just focused on the next step, Master Sergeant." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. It was gone in a second. "Bullshit," he said softly. "Everybody's got a fuel source out there. Rage, pride, fear, some girl back home, something. You don't find a second wind in a place like that by thinking about your next step. You find it by thinking about why you started the journey in the first place." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping even lower. "Your file says you were a personal assistant to some tech hotshot before this. That's a hell of a pivot." The blood drained from my face. How did he know that? It was a part of my life I'd tried to bury. "Relax, Lieutenant," he said, using the rank I hadn't even officially earned yet. It was a gesture of respect that felt unearned. "I make it my business to know who I'm investing in. Point is, you're here, and from what I saw today, you're too stubborn to quit. Stubborn I can work with. Intelligence needs stubborn." He stood up, the chair creaking in relief. "Get some sleep, Vance. The real work starts after you pin on those butter bars." He walked away, leaving me sitting in the quiet library, my mind reeling. That was my first real interaction with the man who would become my mentor. He saw the crack in my armor, the source of my drive, and instead of criticizing it, he acknowledged it as a tool. It was the first time anyone had looked at the mess of my past and seen not a liability, but potential. The next 4 years were a blur of accelerated growth. I commissioned, a moment that felt surreal as I stood at attention, the single gold bar of a second lieutenant feeling heavier than any weight I'd carried in the crucible. I was assigned to the intelligence field, and by a twist of fate, or perhaps Master Sergeant Stone's quiet influence, he was assigned as my senior enlisted advisor. He taught me everything. Not just the tradecraft, the intricate dance of signal intercepts, the dry, vital work of all-source analysis, the art of building a picture from 1,000 scattered pixels of information, but the mindset. He taught me to trust my instincts, to quiet the voice of self-doubt that Damien had nurtured, and that the Marine Corps, in its own way, had tried to institutionalize. One night, about 2 years in, we were in the SCIF, the Sensitive Compartmented Information Facility, a windowless room humming with servers and lit by the cool blue glow of monitors. It was well past 200. We were tracking a potential threat, a piece of the puzzle that refused to fit. I'd been staring at the same data for 6 hours, my eyes gritty with fatigue. The frustration was a tight ball in my chest. "It doesn't make sense," I muttered, pushing back from the terminal. "The pattern is there, but the timing is off. The logistics don't support it." Stone, who had been quietly reviewing a satellite feed at the next station, swiveled his chair. He had a mug of coffee that looked like it had been brewed during the Korean War. "What's eating you, Lieutenant? And don't say the data." I sighed, rubbing my temples. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just seeing ghosts, if I'm trying so hard to prove I belong here that I'm inventing connections. He took a slow sip of his coffee. You think the enemy cares about your feelings? They're going to act whether you feel confident or not. Your job isn't to feel sure. Your job is to be right. And you've got a good nose for this stuff. Better than most officers I've served with who have been at this for a decade. He set his mug down with a definitive click. Let me tell you something my first platoon sergeant told me. He was a force recon guy, seen it all. He said, "Stone, the best revenge you'll ever get is a life lived with purpose. Stop trying to get revenge on whoever you're trying to get revenge on and start living with the purpose of being a damn good intelligence officer. The rest will fade." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. He'd seen right through me again. The ghost of Damien was still in that SCIF with me, a phantom I was still trying to prove wrong. Stone wasn't telling me to forget the past, he was telling me to outgrow it. My life outside the base was sparse. I lived in a small, functional apartment off base, its walls bare except for a few framed photos. My main tether to my old life was Chloe. Our friendship persisted through letters and the occasional crackling phone call when I could get a signal. She was my anchor to a reality that felt increasingly distant. During one call, about a year before the present day, her voice was laced with a familiar, protective energy. "You will not believe who is splashed all over the business section today," she said, without preamble. "Our favorite sociopath." I was stirring a pot of pasta on my hot plate. "Oh yeah, what's Damien up to now? Solved world hunger with a new app." "Better, he's engaged. To some influencer and heiress named Bianca, the article is nauseating. Tech's golden couple. There's a picture of them at some gala. He's got the same smug look, just with a more expensive watch." I stopped stirring. I waited for the pang, the old hurt, the flicker of insecurity. But all I felt was a detached curiosity, like hearing news about a minor celebrity I'd once met. The fire he'd once ignited in me, both the bad and the good, had burned down to cold ash. "Good for him," I said, and I meant it. It truly didn't matter to me. Chloe was silent for a beat. "Wait, are you okay? That's it. Good for him." "What else is there to say, Chloe? That was a different life. I'm a different person." I smiled, a genuine smile she couldn't see. "I'm more concerned about whether this pasta is going to be edible." She laughed, a warm, relieved sound. "Okay, Marine, just making sure. I'm proud of you, you know, like insanely proud." The conversation solidified something for me. The transformation was complete. The Marine Corps had given me more than a career. It had given me a spine. Master Sergeant Stone had given me a compass, and Chloe had given me a safe harbor through the entire stormy voyage. The event that would unknowingly tie my past to my present happened on a Tuesday. I was a first lieutenant now, and I'd been tasked with briefing a congressional delegation touring our facility. These were important dog-and-pony shows, chances to justify our budget to the people who controlled the purse strings. I'd prepared meticulously, distilling weeks of complex analysis into a clear, 15-minute brief. Standing in front of the mirror in my service uniform, the crisp green fabric and sharp creases a world away from the mud-soaked utilities of OCS, I felt a calm certainty. The uniform was no longer a costume, it was a second skin. I adjusted my cover, meeting my own gaze in the glass. The woman looking back was steady, capable. She knew her worth. In the briefing room, the air was cool and smelled of coffee and furniture polish. The delegates, a mix of men and women in sharp business suits, looked on with polite, slightly bored expressions. They'd already sat through several presentations. My job was to wake them up. I stood at the podium, my notes untouched. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My briefing today concerns an emerging pattern of cyber intrusions targeting critical infrastructure and, increasingly, the private sector." I launched into the analysis, my voice level and confident. I detailed the methods, the likely state-sponsored actors, and the specific vulnerabilities they were exploiting. I used clear analogies, avoiding jargon. I saw a few of them sit up straighter, their boredom replaced by interest. Then I presented a hypothetical. Let's consider a specific vector. A mid-sized tech firm, a leader in financial security software, is targeted. The attackers use a sophisticated spear phishing campaign, impersonating a partner company, to gain initial access. Once inside, they don't trigger any major alarms immediately. They lie dormant, mapping the network, looking for the crown jewels, the proprietary source code. I laid out the scenario step by step, the same way we'd been tracking it in the SCIF. I explained how the breach would be nearly undetectable until it was too late, how the company's entire value could be siphoned away overnight. I wasn't naming names. This was an unclassified example, a teaching tool. But every detail was drawn from real, current intelligence. I concluded by outlining the mitigation strategies we recommended, the shared responsibility between government agencies and private industry. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, followed by a spatter of genuine, engaged applause. A senior congressman, the head of the delegation, nodded gravely. "Extremely insightful, Lieutenant. A stark reminder of the threats we face. Thank you." I nodded, "My pleasure, sir." The brief was a success. I packed my materials and left the room, returning to the hushed intensity of the SCIF. It was just another day's work. I had no idea that the hypothetical tech firm I'd described, the one whose doom I had just outlined and then prevented, was Croft Technologies. I didn't know that one of the junior staffers in the room was Olivia Chen, Damien's new PR director, who would rush back to her boss with a frantic warning. I didn't know that my anonymous, professional analysis would trigger a frantic internal review at his company, uncovering the very breach I had described, saving them from catastrophic loss. For me, it was just Tuesday. I slipped back into my chair, the brief already fading from my mind as I turned my attention to the next threat, the next puzzle. The ghost of the woman I had been, the one who organized suits and bore condescension with a quiet shame, was gone. In her place was an officer, an analyst, a woman who had found her purpose. The past was a closed chapter, and I was too busy living the present to ever look back. The scent of fresh rain on hot asphalt is a particular kind of memory trigger. It's clean, sharp, and it cuts through the sterile, air-conditioned air of a military office with the precision of a scalpel. 3 months out from the crucible, the memory of that mud-caked, soul-deep exhaustion was a phantom limb, always there, a dull ache of pride and remembrance. My body had healed, the scrapes and bruises fading into the landscape of minor scars that told the story of my new life. But the transformation was more than skin-deep. The girl who had used her ex-boyfriend's dismissive words as fuel to get through the night was still there, but she was encased in something harder, something polished and professional. Lieutenant Alara Vance, Marine Corps Intelligence Officer. The title fit me now, not like a borrowed jacket, but like a well-tailored uniform. I sat at my desk, the surface a testament to a controlled mind, mission reports stacked in precise alignment, a secure laptop humming softly, a single pen positioned parallel to the desk's edge. Master Sergeant Stone's influence was everywhere, especially in the quiet order of my workspace. The briefing packet in my hands was thick, heavy with the importance of the assignment. A high-profile tech summit, a gathering of the Silicon Valley elite and international dignitaries, required a discreet but ironclad security presence. My unit was tasked with being the invisible shield, the liaison between the private security and our military assets. It was a plum assignment, a sign of the command's trust in our analytical and interpersonal skills. I flipped the page, my eyes scanning the list of primary hosts and sponsors, and there it was. The name hit me not like a thunderclap, but like a sudden, profound silence in the middle of a noisy room. Ethereum, hosted by Damien Croft, CEO. Next to the corporate logo was his photograph. It was a professional headshot, the kind taken for Forbes or a TED Talk profile. Damien, at 32, had lost none of the polished arrogance that had once been so captivating and then so suffocating. His smile was a calculated tool, his eyes holding the camera's lens with an intimate, challenging confidence. He was exactly as I remembered, yet the image felt like a relic from a previous century. The man in the photo was frozen in time, a monument to his own ambition. I, however, had been moving, changing, becoming. My breathing didn't hitch, my hands didn't tremble. The reaction was entirely internal, a seismic shift contained within the reinforced walls of my composure. 5 years. The math was simple and brutal. I was 25 when I walked out of his apartment for the last time, the echo of his words. "You're just not on my level, Alara. It's ambition or the lack of it," lingering in the air like a bad smell. Now I was 30, standing on the other side of a chasm he couldn't even perceive. "Lieutenant Vance." The voice, gruff and familiar, came from my doorway. Master Sergeant Ben, grizzly, stone filled the frame, his arms crossed over his broad chest. His eyes, the color of weathered slate, missed nothing. They took in the packet in my hands, the slight rigidity of my posture, the focused stillness that I used to mask turmoil. "Sergeant," I said, my voice even. I placed the packet back on the desk, careful to keep my movements smooth and deliberate. "You've seen the briefing for the Ethereum Summit," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Good, you're the lead liaison. Your analytical work on the Balkan op impressed the colonel. Says you've got a knack for seeing the angles everyone else misses." He stepped into the office, his presence a grounding force. "This is a circus. Billionaires, politicians, journalists looking for a scandal. We need someone with a cool head and sharp eyes. That's you." "Thank you, Master Sergeant. I won't let the team down." The words were automatic, professional. Inside, a different conversation was raging. He'll be there, in the same room. Would he even recognize me? Would he care? Stone didn't leave. He leaned against the doorframe, studying me. "Something on your mind, Lieutenant? You've got a look. The same look you had right before you navigated that mock-up village in the Crucible. Like you're calculating every variable, including the ones that haven't shown themselves yet." I considered lying, offering a platitude about the complexity of the security matrix. But Stone had a way of smelling dishonesty. He'd seen me at my most broken and my most determined. He'd been the one to hand me my lieutenant's bars, his grip firm, his eyes saying more than any speech ever could. "I see you. You earned this." "The host," I said, my gaze flicking to the packet and back to him. "Damien Croft, I know him." Stone's expression didn't change. "Personally or professionally?" "Personally, a long time ago." He nodded slowly, processing the information. "Is that going to be a problem?" The question hung in the air, a direct challenge to the professional I had become. I thought of the Crucible, of the mud and the pain and the defiant fire that had kept me moving. That fire had been lit by memories of Damien. But now, the fuel was different. It was duty. It was integrity. It was the uniform I wore. "No, Master Sergeant," I said, and I meant it. "It is not a problem. It's a data point." A faint, approving smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Good. Use it then. But remember, Lieutenant, the uniform isn't a weapon for vendettas. It's a shield for the nation. You walk into that room as a United States Marine officer. Nothing else, nothing less. Remember who you are." "I will, Sergeant, thank you." He gave a final, curt nod and turned to leave. "Briefing at 1400, don't be late." The moment he was gone, the professional calm threatened to crack. I needed an anchor, a voice that wasn't steeped in the disciplined ethos of the Corps. I needed Chloe. I grabbed my personal phone and retreated to a quiet corner of the commissary, the sounds of clattering trays and distant conversation a mundane backdrop for the storm in my head. Her face filled the screen after one ring, a splash of vibrant color against the beige walls around me. Her hair was a different shade than it was 5 years ago, a deep burgundy now, but her expression was the same unwavering blend of curiosity and support. "Hey, you, I was just thinking about you. Tell me you're not calling from some swamp again," she said, her voice a familiar comfort. "Worse," I said, managing a weak smile. "A tech summit." "Ooh, sexy. Are you going to rub elbows with nerds in $1,000 sneakers?" "Something like that." I took a breath. "Chloe the Summit, it's hosted by Ethereum." The name landed. Her eyes widened and the playful smile vanished, replaced by a protective sharpness. "No, you have got to be kidding me. Damien's company. The one and only." "Alara, you can't. Tell them to assign someone else. That's insane. After everything he put you through?" Her voice was a hushed, furious whisper. "The arrogant, patronizing I still remember you crying on my couch, and I still want to key his stupid, expensive car." The memory was a sharp, bright shard. Chloe had been my sanctuary, the one who'd listened to my rage and my tears without judgment, who had fed me ice cream and told me I was worth 10 of him. I can't request a reassignment. It would look unprofessional. And besides, my commanding officer specifically assigned me. He trusts me to handle it. "Handle it? How are you supposed to handle being in the same room as the human embodiment of a red flag?" She leaned closer to the screen. "Are you okay?" I looked past the camera at the rain-streaked window. "I don't know, it's strange. Seeing his picture in the briefing packet was like exhaling a breath I'd been holding for 5 years. But it's a stale breath. It doesn't fit anymore." Chloe studied my face, her artist's eyes missing nothing. "You look different," she said softly. "You are different. The Alara I knew then, she would have been terrified. You just look resolved." Master Sergeant Stone told me to remember who I am. "And who are you?" she asked, her tone gentle but probing. I met her gaze squarely. "I'm a Marine Corps intelligence officer. I'm not the girl who cried on your couch." A slow, proud smile spread across Chloe's face. "Damn right you're not. That girl was strong, but she was fighting to prove something to herself. You don't have anything left to prove, Alara, especially not to him." She pointed a finger at the screen. "You listen to me. You go to that gala. You wear your uniform, your way more impressive uniform, by the way, and you stand there in all your badass glory. You let him see you. Let him see that the woman he thought wasn't on his level is now in a league so far above him, he needs a telescope to even catch a glimpse. This isn't a confrontation, it's your closure. Go be a badass." I felt a genuine smile touch my lips for the first time since I'd opened that packet. "Thanks, Chloe." "Always. Now send me pictures of the canapes. I need to live vicariously." The week leading up to the summit was a whirlwind of coordination. My days were spent in a secure conference room, maps of the venue spread across tables, running communications protocols, and threat assessments with a team of sharp, focused Marines. It was in this controlled chaos that I first met Olivia Chen. She arrived for a coordination meeting, a vision of corporate polish in a tailored navy sheath dress. She was younger than I expected, probably 28, with an intelligent, watchful gaze that took in the room and its occupants with swift efficiency. She carried an air of calm competence, but there was a slight tension around her eyes, a wariness that spoke of navigating a demanding environment. "Lieutenant Vance, Olivia Chen, Ethereum PR. I'll be your primary point of contact," she said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm. "A pleasure, Ms. Chen. My team is ready to integrate seamlessly with your security." I gestured to the detailed floor plans. "We've identified the key choke points and we'll have liaisons stationed here, here, and here. Our communications will be on a dedicated encrypted channel." She listened intently, nodding as I outlined the plan. "This is incredibly thorough, thank you. Mr. Croft insists on everything being flawless, but this goes beyond flawless. It's military grade." She offered a small, genuine smile. "Which, I suppose, is the point. We aim for perfection, ma'am. It leaves less room for error." Our meeting was all business, but a mutual respect began to form. She was sharp, anticipating problems I hadn't even raised, and she didn't flinch from the complex jargon of security protocols. I found myself admiring her poise. She was a professional operating in Damien's world, but she lacked the predatory gleam I associated with him. She was ethically grounded, and it showed in her meticulous attention to detail. Once, when discussing the press line, she subtly rerouted the plan to avoid a group of protesters who had gathered outside, not to hide from them, but to ensure their safety and the event's integrity. It was a small thing, but it spoke volumes. The day of the gala arrived. The venue was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all glass and steel, perched on the edge of the bay. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the water, a stark contrast to the cool, controlled environment inside. I stood before a full-length mirror in a private security office, adjusting my dress blue uniform. The uniform was more than clothing. It was a second skin, a symbol. The dark blue jacket was impeccably tailored, the red piping a bold slash of color, the gold buttons gleaming. My hair was pulled back in a severe regulation bun, emphasizing the sharp lines of my face. The woman staring back at me was a stranger to the one Damien had known. Her posture was ramrod straight, her gaze steady and assessing. There was no trace of the uncertainty he had once preyed upon, only resolve. I took my position at the periphery of the main ballroom, near the grand entrance. My role was to observe, to be the calm, authoritative presence overseeing the flow of guests through the final security checkpoint. The air hummed with a low, expensive energy, the clink of crystal, the murmur of conversation in a dozen languages, the subtle scent of perfume and wealth. And then I saw him. Damien Croft held court at the center of the room, a glass of something clear in his hand. He was surrounded by a constellation of admirers, older men in bespoke suits, journalists hanging on his every word, beautiful women laughing at his jokes. He was in his element, the sun around which this particular universe revolved. He wore his success like a crown, his gestures expansive, his smile a brilliant, practiced flash. He was exactly as I remembered, yet the sight of him now evoked not pain or anger, but a profound, almost clinical detachment. He was a subject of analysis, a variable in the security equation. He was completely unaware of my presence. His eyes swept the room, but they glanced over me, a Marine officer doing her job, part of the scenery. The irony was so thick it was almost tangible. The man who had built his empire on perceiving patterns and connections was blind to the one standing 30 feet away. My earpiece crackled softly. "All points secure, Lieutenant. Green status." "Copy that," I murmured, my voice low and steady. My eyes continued their scan, moving from the glittering crowd to the shadows in the corners, from the exits to the windows. I was performing my duty with a focused precision that Master Sergeant Stone would have approved of. But a part of me, the part that Chloe had nurtured, stood beside myself, watching. I saw the moment Olivia Chen approached Damien, her posture deferential but firm as she whispered something in his ear, likely a reminder about his upcoming speech. He nodded dismissively, not really looking at her, his attention already captured by another dignitary. Olivia retreated, her expression professionally neutral, but I caught the faintest tightening of her jaw. I understood that look. It was the look of someone who had to translate vision into reality for a man who only saw the grand design, never the intricate, necessary details. The gala was in full swing now, a symphony of controlled opulence. I remained at my post, a statue of navy and gold, my hands clasped behind my back. The ghosts of the past were there, whispering at the edges of my consciousness, the memory of a younger me, desperate for his approval, shrinking under the weight of his condescension. But they had no power here. The uniform was my armor, my training was my spine, and the quiet knowledge of who I had become was my shield. Damien laughed at something, a loud, confident sound that cut through the murmur of the crowd. He clapped a man on the shoulder, the picture of charismatic authority. He was still the center of his world, but my world had expanded far beyond his orbit. I was no longer a satellite drawn to his gravity. I was a fixed point, a navigational star in a different sky altogether. The chapter wasn't about him anymore. It was about me, standing watch, waiting for the moment our paths would inevitably cross, not with a clash, but with the quiet, devastating force of a truth he could no longer ignore. The evening was just beginning. The opulent ballroom was a symphony of controlled chaos, a sea of black-tie ambition where the clinking of crystal flutes provided a constant, tinny percussion. I stood at my designated post near the main entrance, my dress blues a stark, structured island in a flowing current of silk and designer gowns. The air smelled of expensive perfume, floor polish, and the faint, clean scent of chilled seafood on silver platters. My focus was a living thing, a grid eye superimposed over the room, tracking patterns of movement, noting anomalies, cataloging faces against the mental dossiers I'd memorized. It was a familiar exercise, a form of meditation. For the past 3 hours, I had been Captain Vance, Marine Corps Intelligence Liaison. The ghost of a 25-year-old woman, heart-shattered and future uncertain, felt like a character from a story I'd once been told. My earpiece crackled to life. Control to Vance. It was Corporal Evans, stationed in the Security Command Center we'd set up in a converted catering office. "Vance here, go ahead, Control. We've got a possible unattended bag flagged by sweeps. Grid location Delta 7, near the central pillar, west side. Can you confirm?" My eyes snapped to the location, a relatively quiet corner near a massive floral arrangement. Sure enough, a sleek, charcoal gray laptop bag leaned against the base of the marble pillar, conspicuous in its solitude. Visual confirmed, Control. A laptop bag unattended. I'm moving to investigate. Acknowledged, sending Martinez for support. Negative, Control. Maintain perimeter positions. I'll handle it. The last thing I needed was a visible security scramble. Panic was a virus that spread faster than any real threat. I began a slow, deliberate walk through the crowd, my posture relaxed but my senses dialed to 11. I noted the bag's make, its positioning, the immediate vicinity. No one appeared anxious or watching. It was likely some absent-minded executive, but assuming that was how protocols were breached. As I approached the pillar, I heard a familiar voice rise above the murmur of the crowd. a voice that, for years, had lived in my head rent-free. It was sharper now, more polished with authority, but the underlying note of imperiousness was unmistakable. "This is unacceptable. We have a schedule to keep. Who is responsible for this area?" Damien Croft was holding court with a small group of investors, but his attention was fractured, his irritation palpable. He was taller than I remembered, his boyish charm sanded away into a harder, more severe handsomeness. The expensive cut of his tuxedo did little to soften him. One of his flunkies, a young man with a terrified expression, gestured vaguely in the direction of the bag. Damien's gaze followed and then landed squarely on me. His eyes, the same piercing blue, scanned my uniform, my rank insignia, my face, and saw only an instrument, a functionary. There was not a flicker of recognition. To him, I was part of the hired help, a detail to be managed. He took a few steps toward me, his focus on the bag, his tone dripping with the condescension he reserved for anyone he deemed beneath him. "You there, Sergeant," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Handle this, quickly and quietly. I don't want this disrupting my keynote." The world narrowed to the space between us. The noise of the gala faded into a dull roar. 5 years. 5 years of push-ups in the pre-dawn cold, of aching muscles and blistered feet on forced marches, of mastering complex intelligence systems, of learning to lead, of finding a family in the very discipline I'd sought as a refuge. It had all led to this moment, not as I had sometimes, in my weakest moments, fantasized, with dramatic confrontations or public vindication, but with a simple, profound correction. I met his gaze, my own expression neutral, my posture unwavering. My voice, when it came, was calm and clear, carrying just enough authority to cut through his bluster without needing to rise in volume. "It's Captain Vance, and the situation is contained, Mr. Croft." The change in his face was not instantaneous, but a slow-motion collapse. The arrogance didn't shatter. It liquefied, draining away to reveal pure, unadulterated confusion. His brow furrowed slightly. His eyes, which had slid away from me already, snapped back. They scanned my face again, but this time they were looking for her, the girl he'd left crying on a rainy sidewalk, the one he'd told was adorably ambitious, but ultimately not enough for his trajectory. They traveled from my short, no-nonsense haircut, over the sharp line of my jaw, to the captain's bars on my shoulders, and back to my eyes, which held his without a trace of the insecurity he expected to find. The blood drained from his face, leaving a pallid shock in its wake. "Ilara?" The word was a choked exhale, barely audible. The investors behind him had fallen silent, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Olivia Chen, standing slightly apart from the group, her PR smile frozen in place, watched the exchange with keen, suddenly alert eyes. He took an involuntary step closer, his voice a stammering, pathetic whisper. I heard you joined them, but this?" He gestured weakly at my uniform, as if it were a costume he couldn't comprehend. "A captain." I didn't smile, I didn't gloat, I simply continued the mission. "The unattended bag has been identified, Mr. Croft. One of your logistics team appears to have misplaced it while setting up the AV equipment. It's been cleared by my personnel." I gestured to Evans, who was now speaking with a red-faced young woman in an Ethereum staff polo shirt, who was profusely apologizing into her headset. "There is no threat. You may proceed with your schedule." I turned my attention fully to Olivia, excluding Damien as if he were a piece of the scenery. "Ms. Chen, the situation is resolved. We'll have the bag returned to your operations room." Olivia's eyes met mine. In that brief, silent exchange, a universe of understanding passed between us. I saw the quick, intelligent assessment in her gaze, the dawning realization of who I was in the context of Damien's past, and a flicker of something that looked like pity for him, followed by a solid, unwavering respect for me. She gave me a small, professional nod. "Thank you, Captain Vance. We appreciate your efficiency." I nodded back, then turned and walked away, my boots making soft, solid sounds on the polished floor. I didn't look back at Damien. I didn't need to. The image of his shattered composure was already seared into my memory, not as a trophy, but as a data point. The subject's primary vulnerability, it turned out, was having the foundational assumption of his superiority proven false. I continued my rounds, the adrenaline receding, leaving a strange, hollow calm in its wake. The rest of the event passed without incident. Damien delivered his keynote, his voice regaining its polished confidence, but from my position at the back of the room, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the occasional, almost imperceptible hesitation as his eyes scanned the crowd, perhaps searching for me. He never found me. I was just another shadow in the periphery, but now I was a shadow he knew. After the last of the guests had departed, the cavernous ballroom felt like a stage after the play has ended. The cleanup crew began their work, their quiet efficiency a stark contrast to the earlier cacophony. I did a final walkthrough with my team, debriefing each member, praising their professionalism. Corporal Evans gave me a thumbs up. "Smooth sailing, Captain, even with the laptop scare." "Good work tonight, everyone. Dismissed." I stood alone for a moment in the emptying venue. The grand chandeliers were dimmed, and the only sounds were the whir of vacuums and the clatter of folding tables. I walked slowly back to the spot near the central pillar. I could still feel the ghost of the confrontation, but the echo of Damien's words, "You there, Sergeant?" had no power here. They were just words, spoken by a man who was, ultimately, small. The victory wasn't in his stunned recognition. It was in the simple, unassailable fact that his opinion no longer held any sway over the woman I had become. The reflection I saw of myself in the dark, mirrored walls of the ballroom was not the reflection he saw. He saw a challenge to his ego. I saw a woman who had kept her promises to herself. An hour later, I was back in the sterile, familiar lighting of the base. The scent of the gala, perfume and champagne, had been replaced by the smells of floor wax and diesel from the nearby motor pool. In the quiet of the women's locker room, I began the methodical process of changing out of my dress blues. Each piece of the uniform was handled with care, folded with the precision that had become second nature. The wool of the jacket, the crisp cotton of the shirt, the sharp crease of the trousers, they were layers of an identity I had built for myself, piece by piece. Standing in my standard-issue green t-shirt and shorts, I faced the mirror. The woman who looked back had tired eyes, but they were clear and steady. There were fine lines at their corners that hadn't been there 5 years ago, etched by sun and stress and responsibility. My shoulders were squared, not with the defensive rigidity of old, but with a quiet strength that came from within. I looked at myself not for validation, not to see if I was enough for anyone else, but with a simple, profound acceptance. This was me, Alara Vance, Captain Marine. I picked up my personal phone, its civilian case feeling strange in my hand after hours of using military comms. I scrolled to Chloe's number and hit call. She answered on the first ring, her voice bursting with anticipation. "Well, don't you dare leave me hanging. How did it go? Did you see him? Did he see you? Do I need to come over with tequila and a flamethrower?" I leaned against the cool metal of the locker, a slow, genuine smile finally touching my lips. The sound of her voice, that fierce, unwavering loyalty, was the final anchor back to my real world. "It's done," I said, my voice quiet but firm. There was a beat of silence on the other end, and then a soft, understanding sigh. "Oh, honey, tell me everything." But I didn't need to, not really. The details were unimportant. The feeling was everything. The closure wasn't a dramatic event, it was a quiet settling, like dust after a long journey. I had faced the ghost, and I had found it was only a man, and a lesser one than I had built him up to be. And I had found myself, standing firm, unshaken, and finally, completely, at peace.